Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Creditverse. I'm Rod Griffin, Senior Director of Consumer Education and Advocacy for Experian, and this is where we talk about everything in the credit universe and the information world, for that matter. So that's why we're here. We want to help inform people, help you get the information you need. October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We're coming up on the end of the month, and thought it would be a great time to sort of wrap up with the guest I have today, who I'm very excited to have with me, a colleague at Experian, expert in the field of cybersecurity. I'm excited to have Brian Stack here. Brian is Vice President of the Experian Engineering and Dark Web Intelligence Group at Experian Consumer Services. He's very impressive. I'm happy to work with really intelligent people and learn from them every day, because I certainly don't fit that. It's like the people above me always be with smarter people than you, and I get to do that every single day. So Brian is a software and technology and information systems executive with nearly 20 years of startup and enterprise experience. He's a 3-time Experian North America Inventor of the Year and holds several patents. In his current role, Brian leads a team of data scientists, analysts, and software engineers out of San Diego, India, Boston, and London. So Experian is a global company. Sometimes people don't realize that. They're responsible for scouring the dark web for compromised consumer data and incorporating non-credit-based data sources such as court records, payday loans, social network data to produce best-of-breed identity protection products for Experian consumers and business partners. I always think that's interesting. When I talk to consumers, we think about things like payday lending and those sorts of things often get lumped into the predatory lending arena, but we use that data to help protect people and help people be more successful. So I think it's a really awesome thing that we're able to do. Brian is a New York native, has an MS in computer engineering, currently lives in San Clemente, California. He's an active runner, amateur horticulturalist. Before we started, we were just talking about our gardening successes or failures. So Brian's a little more successful than me. I'm just trying to get tomatoes to grow. So lucky. Different subject for a different day. Brian, thank you for being here, and look forward to having a great conversation and talking about cybersecurity. Jump right in. And one of the things that I like to talk about, we talk about the Internet of Things. Another thing we're talking about was my Roomba just went by and was shutting it down. And you think about the Internet of Things, and it rolled by, I watched it go by on the floor, thought that's connected too. You know, so many things are connected to the Internet. What kinds of trends are you seeing in cybersecurity, in threats to people and their information? I think a good place to start, just what's happening out there.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be here and with you, Rod, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. There's a lot of trends. So my dark web analyst, let's just start with kind of the dark web trends, and then we'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity in general. Sure. But so my analysts around the world, they put together a yearly trend report. Some of the things that they're seeing consistently is that there is an increase in kind of medical personal information that's out there. Yeah. So whether it be doctors' office, dentist offices, hospitals, it's not that the threat actors are interested in your x-rays or your test results. It's the fact that when you think about how much data is available in those databases, it's kind of everything, right? It's your social security number, it's your address, your name, your insurance information. So it's just a great treasure trove of data. So it's not the medical data, it's kind of all the ancillary identity data that is in medical databases. That continues to stay pretty steady. The market is very undiscriminating in terms of who it attacks, whether it be a small business, a medium-sized, large corporation, individuals. There's various hacker groups. Really, there's about 5 different types of groups when you think about kind of threat actors in the space. So there is a typical, what we call script kiddies, which is kind of the Hollywood version of the teenage hacker, in his garage, right? And they're often doing it, whenever we think about this space, you got to think about motivation. They're doing it usually to disrupt things. Then you have the anarchists, which are looking to, you have places like Anonymous, and there are official hacking groups that are looking to just disrupt society. Then you have organized crime, and that is a big focus and factor for us because they are in it for the money. The fourth one is basically a nation state. So these are states, nations, whether it be North Korea, Russia, China, that often have organized groups that are meant to kind of disrupt global economies and disrupt nations and elections potentially. And then the fifth one everyone forgets is disgruntled employees. That's the fifth kind of group that often gets data onto the dark web and creates a lot of these threats. Some of the other big trends we're seeing is that it doesn't really matter what platform. Obviously, people think of the dark web, they think of like dark web websites. That's part of it, that's still there. But a lot of stuff, like everything else, has moved to mobile, moved to messenger-based services. There's also, with the increase in cryptocurrency, it's very hard to track a lot of these transactions. So a lot of the stuff happens there. So those are some of the big definite trends we're seeing that are fairly consistent on the dark web. In terms of cybersecurity, you mentioned Roomba, right? And so we all have all this great technology that can improve our lives, make things easier. But the flip side of it is you generally are giving up a small slice of your privacy every time. So when it comes to a lot of this technology, it's a balancing act. There's a few things I would recommend to folks watching. One is whenever you have one of these products or services or things like that, think about when usually there's a website or a mobile app you sign up for. Look at what type of information you're handing over is the first thing, right? So if your Roomba is asking for, details about your address and stuff like that, is that really relevant to your Roomba? Also look at things like privacy policies. I know those can be a little rough, but often it'll be, do you want to, can we share data with third parties, right? So try to eliminate what you do share and don't share through some of these services. And the other piece is, if a lot of them do have mics, right? So mics are on, the companies have come out, I'm not gonna name anyone in specific, but they've come out and said, well, we don't actually actively take anything you say that isn't relevant to a search as part of an action and use that in any type of logic. At the end of the day, it still is gathering information. So if you are a little more privacy savvy, mute those things at certain times when you probably aren't using them, and kind of unmute them when you actually want to leverage and use the device.
Yeah, that's a really good point to think about how many things in our life today have cameras and microphones. So I think two things, as you were talking, that came to mind. One, can you define the dark web just at a very basic level? A lot of us don't, I don't even know how to get there. That's probably a good thing. Where it is. It's out there, yeah. I know, and it's huge. So what is that? And then we think about microphones and cameras on the things we own, and what's being collected.
Sure. So let's step back and think about there's three kind of chunks of layers of the internet overall that you can kind of think of. The first is what's known as the surface web. And so that's anything that's accessible by what's called a link crawling search engine. So Google, Yahoo, Bing, these are all the sites. The surface web are all the sites you pretty much use every day. They're the media sites, the sports sites, the email services you use, stuff like that. The next big chunk is called the deep web. Now, this is one of my pet peeves. Hollywood, social media, they interchange deep web and dark web. The dark web is part of the deep web, but the deep web is not the dark web. The deep web makes up the vast majority of the internet. And very simply, that's anything that requires credentials to get into. So think about your corporate network. Think about logging into, your doctor's office to make an appointment, right? You need a name and a password to get into it. And all the pages behind that, all that content, that's all deep web. It's nothing scary, nothing sketchy. It's all the things that are secured that you can't just search on Google and get to your, inside your dentist appointment schedule. You got to actually log into the site. Now, the dark web. There's two ways to look at the dark web. We'll take a narrow interpretation, which is what most people view it as. Then we're going to open up our aperture and look at a broader interpretation, which is the way myself and my team look at it. So in a classical sense, the dark web requires special access, special software, and often some type of cryptocurrency to get into the sites. So special software like Tor. So the Tor network is a big part of the dark web. It's known, the TOR is the onion router. It basically is a network of hypersecurity and anonymity of transactions and services. So when you go onto the Tor network, you can get access to what are known as hidden services. So sites and forums and websites that are much more secure because people don't know who you are when you access them. When you go to Google, they know everything pretty much about you. You enter Tor, you get bounced around, and all of a sudden it looks like I may be here in San Clemente, but when I enter the Tor network, it looks like I'm somebody in Italy. So by doing that, it creates that buffer of anonymity. The other part is credentials. Often there are a lot of forums that you have to build credentials for, and you have to participate in these forums. And then once you kind of build credibility in some of these forums, and this is what a lot of my analysts do, you get access to deeper and deeper links and more information. So you'll be on these sites, you'll maybe post data, maybe you'll talk about the politics, and if people like your comments, you can get access. Then the other piece is often some of these sites you need Bitcoin or Monero or Litecoin. You have to pay a small chunk to get into those sites. So that's the narrow interpretation. Larger, the way Experian views it is we view the dark web as any place where personal information is vulnerable. And that includes the dark web, but also includes a lot of places on the surface web, whether it be through YouTube or through social media services like Twitter and Discord and Telegram, anywhere where people are potentially sharing stolen or compromised data. We're there looking to try to harvest that data.
Cool. So, it's what we don't realize is that the internet that most of us see is a very small piece of the internet as a whole. I got a notice, one of our perks as employees of Experian, we get the premier subscription to our monitoring services. I got a notice that my information had popped up in the dark web. What does that mean? What is when we're looking for information, and what should I do about that?
Yeah, so it can mean a few things in terms of where it was found. So it could have been found on the Tor network. It could have been found on some, Russian hacking forum, or we could have found it on, a Twitter account that we're monitoring where someone is basically sharing information and they're posting data. So where it could be in any of those places. It could be on the surface web. It could be on the dark web. Again, that's why we have that larger aperture. It's not just focused to these super secret, Russian hacking or Chinese hacking forum sites. It's people, you can go to surface websites. There's ones you can search and people post information. Pastebin is a famous one. Pastebin.com, you can go to it, you can post, people post all kinds of relevant stuff, important stuff about education or how to garden, tips, but people also will post other stuff. And we also look there. In terms of what to do, it depends on the data element that's compromised. So if it's an email, obviously you want to see, okay, is this email shared on certain sites that are very important to me? Like, is this an email attached to my financial site? Then you probably should go and change the password pretty quickly. If it's something along the lines of like a credit card, then you can go and cancel the credit card. If it's an SSN issue, that's a real big issue. That's where you'd want to go and download your credit reports and make sure your actual, because an SSN is a key to your true identity, and that can be used to open up credit lines in your name. So it really depends on the attribute that is compromised, kind of your path of action moving forward.
Okay. And that's what our monitoring services are really, the value is that it helps people, the work you and your team do and the services that we provide enables them to identify or be made aware of use of their information or access to information that they wouldn't necessarily know about, right? I mean, that's the whole intent, and we help people respond.
Yeah, I mean, we view ourselves as world-class in this area, and I would say tips to consumers who are looking to maybe increase their identity protection. We offer not only just the breadth of data, we have billions of records in our cyber database, but also the number of attributes that we actually monitor. There's a lot of companies out there that'll do email, maybe they'll do phone number. We do about a dozen or so elements, everything from passports, driver's license, medical IDs, you name it. If it's on the dark web and can be monetized, we're pretty much grabbing it and trying to protect people.
And in that score, so we talk about the 4 P's of ID protection. Can you run through those? What are they, and how do people use them?
Yeah, so this is kind of a moniker a little bit we came up with to try to get people to remember. So remember 4 P's. So patching, passwords, public Wi-Fi, and protection software. these are kind of, I think, the baseline. If you focus on these things, you'll be in pretty good shape. So let's start with patching, right? So these are everything from laptops to tablets to your iPhone or Android. Make sure that automatic updates are turned on. For the most part, they are turned on by default, but sometimes people accidentally shut them off. You always want to be getting new updates to your software. I know it can kind of be a little time consuming, and sometimes the interfaces change and people don't like change, but the risk of they're doing this because there's a security risk. Sometimes there's feature updates, but most of the time these patches are due to the fact there's vulnerabilities. So do the patching upgrades. Public Wi-Fi, generally avoid it. If you have to use it, before the pandemic, I was traveling a lot more than I do now. And of course, you do have to use it on occasion. Don't do it for financial transactions ever. But if you are going to do it, make sure it is secure before you actually use public Wi-Fi. Protection software. Go ahead.
So excuse me. So if you're in the airport, like you and I were off a lot more before, you need to log in. You need to get access. Do you recommend using VPNs? Do the private VPNs that we can all get work? Is that something worth investing in?
They do. So I think they are helpful, but it won't solve the public Wi-Fi issue. So if I'm a threat actor and I'm in the airport and I set up, let's say you're in LAX, right? And you see LAX free guest, like 1. Okay, if that's me, I'm a threat actor, and I created this fake Wi-Fi hotspot, you log into it, even if you're doing stuff on VPN, it can potentially help, but chances are you're probably going to log into it. Maybe you're going to check your email, then maybe you'll start your VPN. And so, it's one of those things where once you log into that, they can see any traffic that's not encrypted. So yeah, if you do it and then hop on a VPN and make sure all your traffic's encrypted, it'll definitely narrow that risk for sure. But it just as a general practice, especially when you're traveling, usually your brain's in a few different places. You may forget to turn on that VPN and do it. So I'd rather you don't use public Wi-Fi or make sure it is secure before you do it.
Before you do, yeah.
Yeah. Protection software, so antivirus, firewalls, and again, things like Experian's, ID Works, Identity Works are great products that can kind of up your game. Firewalls and antivirus are baseline. A lot of those you can get either they're built into your OS, make sure they're on, or you can download them for free. Then the last one is passwords. So this is a big one, right? Yeah. Usually the advice that most security experts will give is you got to have these very random passwords and make sure every site is different. Let's live in the real world. Unless you're using a password manager, which are good, but usually unless you're a power user, most people aren't going to use a password manager, which you can put all these passwords in and you can have all these super random passwords and it can help you auto log into sites. They're great. Most people don't use them. The adoption is low. So the advice of make these scrambled passwords and different everywhere is not realistic. So we need to focus on how to make hard to crack and easy to remember. The key is not if it's scrambled. You can have a password that's, let's say, ABC176#3. The actual, very random, it's about 8-9 characters. It can be broken in about a month. So it's not the randomness, it's the length is the biggest factor in making things hard to crack. So my advice is make a story a little bit and think about something that's not real. So for example, I like bears, right? So you can say, I like bears is a phrase. And what doesn't exist? Red bears. I like red bears. That's a very long, very easy to remember password that'll take hundreds, if not thousands of years to crack today. So that's my recommendation for passwords. The other part of that coin is use different passwords for financial institutions that you use versus kind of your general media transactions, right? So keep those separate. So this way, if there is a threat and you do get an alert, you can basically decide, do I need to fix something now? If my Macy's.com email is attacked with my credit card information, that's probably a very different scenario than Netflix, right? Netflix isn't great, but I'm probably not going to run, and I don't have as much to worry about. Or if my bank account password is cracked, right? So that's my advice on passwords.
It's tricky. I do use a password manager now. I told my wife we did some banking things and changed some things. You know, it's getting to the point where I've lost track, and I know
that's what happens, right? People lose track. They don't remember. Again, password managers are great. There's some really good ones out there. They've gotten better over time in terms of usability. But that's my advice to basically people who don't want to go and spend money on a password manager. Make it long and make it a phrase, but a phrase that often doesn't exist, because red bears don't exist. So a lot of the machine learning and automation that threat actors use won't use that term together because it's not part of the natural language.
Yeah. See, and that's what, I can't remember names. So they always, you make up a phrase to remind you of a person. I worked with a guy here for years at Experian. His name was Clark. And I thought, okay, Superman, I'll remember Clark. I could remember I'd see him and think, Superman. Why am I thinking of Superman? That was terrible with those things, getting the right phrase at the connection. So when I started using a password manager, I was shocked. I very quickly reached more than 100 different sites with passwords, with things and just the sheer volume that we don't think about now, that we need passwords and credentials.
Yeah. Anytime I see, with a podcast or something where I hear a security expert say, well, you got to make them random and you need different ones everywhere, I just want to throw something at the screen, because I'm like, that's just not practical for a normal person. There's not going to do that. Another little nugget too is often when you sign up for accounts, it'll ask for either, like a security question or your mother's maiden name. Don't actually use your mother's maiden name. Use your best friend's mother's maiden name. Like, make that your standard. Because obviously when your identity is stolen, depending on how much of it is stolen, chances are they probably have data on your mother's maiden name. So, and they can use that to, even if you have a great password, I forgot my password as a threat actor, I go into your account, I have your mother's maiden name, and then now I can reset your password.
Yeah. So social security number, a good password? that is not password, a good password, or
there are a list of kind of commonly common passwords people use, and it's also another one is media pop culture. Don't use pop culture references. If you're a big Avengers fan, don't be like #1 Avengers fan, because guess what? Everyone's using that same password too, and the threat actors know that and stuff.
So the reality is none of us are as clever as we think we are.
That is exactly
no, I'm not. So it never works for me. So we talk about, we're going through a really interesting time right now, difficult time. When you think about COVID-19 and the things that are happening now, do you see kinds of trends in terms of related to those sorts of issues? For example, and you mentioned something that I was a victim of a breach that resulted in tax fraud a few years ago. And we know people every year go through that. Do you see specific things that are related to cultural events, issues that are global in nature, political issues that drive some of the cybersecurity issues?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So quickly on COVID, yes, there's definitely been a spike. So some of the early statistics that have come out in kind of the May, June, July timeframe, there was a 238% increase in attacks on banks. The FBI saw an 800% increase in overall cybercrime from kind of April, May, and into early June. Abnormal security. They look at things like kind of the brand threats. And if you look at like January, February, it was American Express, Amazon, and iCloud were the top 3 brands that were often part of phishing or smishing attacks, which are, some stuff you get on your text messages. After COVID, it became Amazon, Zoom, and DHL, right? So you can see kind of that shift of so again, or especially organized crime and threat actors in general, they see the market shift, and the market shifted from, well, people are working from home, they're receiving a lot of packages. That's where the most vulnerability is, and so that's where I'm going to start to put a lot of my focus. In terms of seasonality within this space, yes, there definitely is. We definitely see a spike during the holiday season coming up. just because people are just shopping online more. So there's just more opportunity to send someone a great deal, send someone free shipping, or if you're impersonating a particular brand that's very popular this time of year, it's a great way to get a hook on people. Also during tax season, we see a spike related to tax-related fraud. And in terms of globally elections, whether not even just U.S., obviously everything's focused on U.S. elections right now, but U.S. Elections in other parts of the world, you can see regional threat actors. It could be an election in India, and you'll see particular threat actors who are more focused in that region have a spike in that type of data. And the majority of our kind of global product is U.S. focused, but we are expanding globally, and we do offer products in several different countries to try to protect people's identity, because the dark web is not U.S. centric. It's a global kind of a global database of information across for that it can affect anybody anywhere.
Oh, wow. So one last thing, when we talk about how do we respond, why can't, and we were chatting a little bit earlier, why can't we just shut it down? How do we stop, the people want a sort of this macro solution. Why is that not practical?
Yeah. So there's probably four or five main reasons why the dark web. So I get this question a lot. Why don't we just shut down the dark web? I mean, we got the U.S. military, shut it down. So there's a few reasons. One is the dark web is distributed everywhere. So it's across all these different sites and countries and networks. And so no one government has jurisdiction over any particular. So if there's a server in Pakistan, the U.S. government doesn't really have jurisdiction to just go and shut it down, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that a lot of it is heavily encrypted, not only in terms of the traffic, but in terms of what people buy and sell. So they're using cryptocurrency, which is it's not invulnerable to people figuring out your identity, but it makes it much harder. So when people do some of these illegal transactions, it's much harder to track. Thirdly, because of the increase in anonymity and encryption, it is hard to figure out who is this person. And again, like I mentioned, using Tor and other services, I may be sitting here in San Clemente, but someone may think I'm some threat actor in Italy. And it's going to be hard to make that connection, right? So just the security and the services that make up that network make it really hard to actually track and shut that kind of stuff down. I think the fourth big one is that it's not just all bad. So the dark web, at the end of the day, it's a vehicle to securely and anonymously transfer information. So that is why journalists use it. Military and the governments do use it, working with dissidents in other nations. Journalists do it again with political dissidents, and for countries that don't respect free speech as necessarily as much as we do, that it gives them a vehicle to securely and anonymously post information that's happening in their country. And so that's why it is, regardless of all the other stuff that happens, the drugs, the guns, the everything else, it is a vehicle to help people securely and transfer data.
Yeah. So it's that sort of perpetual conflict, if you will. You don't want to stop the good in an effort to end the bad. I mean, and that's
correct. And I think probably the final one, the fifth reason is it takes a lot of expertise. This is not, and there's a shortage of technical expertise at this level. Whether it be in private sector or in the government, to, again, figure this out, figure out the back doors, try to figure out how to trace some of this traffic in order to figure out, who potentially is selling the grenades and on the dark web.
Yeah, huge challenge. So just to wrap up, just quickly, give me, again, we kind of covered the 4 Ps. What, as an individual consumer, what do I need to think about? Just like three or four, maybe hit them again. What do we need to think about to make sure that we're safe when we're working and living in the cyber world, in online world?
Yeah. So we hit the 4 Ps. I'm not going to repeat them, but here's I think a few other additional things as part of kind of that checklist, right? Is make a list of your online accounts and figure out which ones are financial and which ones are kind of not financially related. And based on that bifurcation, try to secure both with stronger passwords and different passwords compared to the non-financial accounts. 2, the financial accounts, make sure you're using some type of two-factor authentication. Most offer it, meaning you don't just need a password to get into it. Usually you need to get a text message with some type of code to get into that site. So even if someone breaks your password, they also need that PIN code to get in. Also, do a baseline. Do the free credit reports across all 3 bureaus. Figure out kind of where your identity level is at, what accounts you have open, how the credit bureaus view you. And I'd say also there are free scans. Experian has the triple scan for emails, social security number, and phone numbers. Figure out what is your dark web footprint. Figure out where it is. Maybe your risk is really low. So if you do get an alert, or you get 2 or 3 alerts, you kind of know, you can gauge, is this abnormal for me? Maybe something happened here, and maybe I need to relook at changing passwords or securing and locking down some of my identity.
So be vigilant, be observant, know where you are, and always be thoughtful. I mean, I think it's always interesting because being so connected is so valuable. At the same time, it's fraught with risk. So we have to figure out how to work within it. So thank you so much for being here, Brian.
No problem.
Love to talk to you. It's always learn things. So thank you very much. And thank you all for joining. And you can watch this video later as well. Join us on Crowdcast. We're trying to be here at Creditverse once a month, and we'll keep you posted. We're also on Facebook Live. Join us on Twitter every Wednesday, 2 o'clock Central, 3 Eastern at #CreditChatLive. And on our other social channels, check us out at Experian.com. We always have lots of great information about cybersecurity and credit reporting and scoring, everything else. So thank you all for being here. Brian, thank you. Everybody, stay safe, stay well, and we'll talk to you all again very soon. Take care, everybody.